Rylan Pierce never expected his ordinary shift at Orbital Medical Station Delta to end with him treating alien royalty. As the station's head trauma surgeon, he'd seen his share of unusual cases, but nothing could have prepared him for the chaos that erupted when the Centaurian diplomatic vessel exploded. The blast rocked the entire medical wing, sending equipment crashing to the floor as emergency klaxons blared throughout the station. Through the observation window, Rylan watched the diplomatic ship's hull breach in a spectacular display of purple-tinged flames, a telltale sign of Centaurian fuel cells rupturing. Multiple casualties incoming. The AI system announced as emergency teleporters began humming to life. Priority 1, Centaurian biosignatures detected. Rylan rushed to the teleporter pad, medical scanner already in hand. The air crackled with energy as the first victim materialized, a Centaurian female with iridescent purple skin and elaborate ceremonial markings that identified her as nobility. She lay unconscious, a nasty gash across her temple leaking silvery blood. Without hesitation, Rylan pressed his hands against the wound, applying pressure while reaching for a tissue regenerator. The moment his skin made contact with hers, her eyes snapped open, blazing with fury. "How dare you lay your primitive hands upon me," she snarled, her translator making her words harsh and guttural. She tried to push herself up but immediately swayed, clearly dizzy from blood loss. "Your Highness," Rylan said firmly, recognizing the specific pattern of her markings as belonging to the royal house. "You have a severe head injury and possible concussion. I need to treat you immediately. I am Princess Nyrane of the First House," she spat, though her voice was weakening. "I would rather die than be touched by a human." "That can be arranged, Your Highness, but I took an oath to preserve life, even the lives of those who despise me." Rylan continued working, his movements precise and professional despite her protests. "Now please hold still unless you want me to botch your tissue regeneration and leave a very unsightly scar." More casualties were materializing on nearby pads, filling the air with moans and cries for help. But Rylan kept his focus on the princess, whose silver blood was now forming an alarming pool beneath her head. "My guards," she mumbled, her resistance failing as shock set in. "Where are my—" "The station's security teams are handling the situation," Rylan assured her, though in truth he had no idea what was happening beyond his medical bay. "Right now, you need to let me help you." She fell silent then, either from acceptance or simply losing consciousness again. Rylan worked quickly, using the regenerator to knit together the damaged tissue while monitoring her vital signs. Centaurian physiology was notoriously complex, with multiple redundant organs and a circulatory system that operated under tremendous pressure. One wrong move could trigger a cascade failure. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the intricate patterns of her ceremonial markings, how they seemed to shift and flow with her pulse. Despite her hostility, there was something fascinating about her alien beauty, so different from human standards yet undeniably regal. The sound of weapons fire in the corridor outside snapped him back to reality. The medical bay doors slid open as station security rushed in, taking defensive positions. "Dr. Pierce," the lead officer called out. "We have confirmation this was a deliberate attack. The princess was the target. We need to move her to a secure location immediately." Rylan looked down at his patient, who was starting to stir again. "She's not stable enough to move yet. The regeneration needs at least another 10 minutes. More weapons fire, closer now." The security team's commander cursed. "We don't have 10 minutes, Doctor. Hostile forces have breached the station. They're heading this way." "Then we'll have to defend this position," Rylan said firmly, continuing his work. "I'm not risking her life by moving her too soon." The princess's eyes fluttered open again, focusing on him with considerably less hatred than before. You would risk your life to protect me? After how I treated you?" "It's not about you, Your Highness," Rylan replied, adjusting the regenerator's settings. It's about doing what's right. Although, he added with a slight smile, it would be nice if you stopped calling us primitive. An explosion rocked the corridor outside, and the security team opened fire. Through the chaos, Rylan maintained his focus on his patient, his hands steady as he completed the delicate procedure. Whatever was coming through that door would have to wait, he had a life to save, royal or not. The princess watched him work, her expression unreadable. But something had changed in her eyes, a subtle shift that suggested she was seeing him, seeing humans, in a new light. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other's species. As the firefight intensified outside, Rylan realized that saving her life might have been the easy part. Keeping her alive in the face of whoever wanted her dead would prove to be a much greater challenge, one that would force them both to overcome their prejudices and trust each other to survive. The maintenance tunnels of Orbital Medical Station Delta were never meant to accommodate a Centaurian princess and a human doctor on the run. Yet here they were, crouching in the narrow service passages as hostile forces swept through the main corridors above. Princess Nyrane fought to keep her breathing steady, still weak from her injury despite Dr. Pierce's skilled treatment. The human moved ahead of her with surprising grace, checking each junction before motioning her forward. His medical kit was slung across his back, occasionally catching on the low ceiling. "This is absolutely beneath my dignity," she muttered, though without the earlier venom in her voice. Her ceremonial robes were already ruined, stained with silver blood and grime from the tunnels. "Would you prefer to maintain your dignity in their custody?" Rylan asked, pausing to check his handheld scanner. "Because I can always escort you back upstairs." A distant explosion emphasized his point. Nyrane grimaced but kept moving. "How much further to this safe house of yours?" "2 more sections." He helped her over a particularly challenging step, and this time she didn't flinch at his touch. "Though I have to warn you, it's not exactly up to royal standards. I've already crawled through your maintenance tunnels, Doctor. I doubt anything could lower my standards further." Despite her words, there was an almost playful tone in her voice. They reached a junction where several tunnels converged. Rylan checked his scanner again, frowning at the readings. "We've got multiple signatures approaching from the upper levels. They're being thorough." "They'll be using quantum trackers," Nyrane said, her expression darkening. "They can detect Centaurian biosignatures through several meters of shielding. Good thing I came prepared then." Rylan reached into his medical kit and pulled out a small device. "Quantum Field Scrambler. Standard equipment for treating Centaurian patients. Your biology tends to interfere with our medical scanners." Nyrane stared at him. "You adapted medical equipment into a countermeasure?" "Humans may be primitive," he said with a slight smile, "but we're resourceful." The scrambler hummed to life, creating a subtle distortion in the air around them. Nyrane felt her skin tingle as her natural quantum signature was masked. "This way," Rylan whispered, leading her down a narrower passage. "My quarters are connected to an old emergency shelter." The station's original builders were paranoid about hull breaches, built backup systems for everything. As they moved through the dimly lit tunnel, Nyrane found herself studying her unlikely protector. His movements were precise, economical, showing training beyond that of a simple doctor. "You're not just a medical officer, are you? Let's just say I've had an interesting career." He paused at a heavy door, entering a complex code into the manual keypad. Emergency medicine in deep space tends to attract people with diverse skill sets. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a small but well-organized living space. Medical supplies shared shelf space with survival gear and what appeared to be encrypted communication equipment. "Welcome to my humble abode," Rylan said, securing the door behind them. "It's not much, but it's defensible and off the main station grid." Nyrane took in the sparse quarters, noting the multiple escape routes and hidden weapon caches with a tactician's eye. You've been preparing for something like this. I've learned to be prepared for everything. He gestured to a comfortable-looking chair. Please, sit. I need to check your wound and change the dressing. She sat without protest this time, watching as he gathered medical supplies. His hands were gentle as he examined the healing tissue where her injury had been, his touch professional but somehow comforting. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. After how I treated you, after everything my people have said about humans. Rylan continued his work, silent for a moment. Because 20 years ago, when humans first encountered your species, a Centaurian medical officer saved my sister's life during the Proxima colony disaster. She didn't care that humans were considered primitive or that touching us was supposedly beneath her dignity. She just saw someone who needed help. Nyrane felt something shift inside her, decades of ingrained prejudice cracking like ice in spring. I never heard about that. No, you wouldn't have. It doesn't fit the official narrative about humans, does it? He finished changing her dressing and stepped back. Rest now. Once you're stronger, we need to figure out who's trying to kill you and why. She caught his hand as he turned away, surprising them both. Her iridescent skin seemed to glow where it touched his. Thank you, Dr. Pierce. For everything. Rylan, he corrected softly. If we're going to be fugitives together, you might as well use my first name. A small smile curved her lips. Rylan, she tested the name. Then you must call me Nyrane. I think we're well past titles at this point. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that transcended their species' differences and prejudices. But before either could acknowledge it, Rylan's security systems chimed a warning. Someone's accessing the station's environmental controls, he said, moving to check his monitors. They're not just trying to find you anymore. They're trying to flush us out. Nyrane stood, her royal bearing returning despite her fatigue. Then we stop running and start fighting back. Show me what other medical equipment you've adapted. It's time these assassins learned that a Centaurian princess and a human doctor can be a dangerous combination. As they began planning their counterattack, both realized that their unlikely partnership had evolved into something neither of them expected, trust. And perhaps, though neither would admit it yet, something more. The station's environmental alarms blared as toxic gas began seeping through the ventilation system. In Rylan's quarters, screens displayed the spreading contamination in ominous red patterns. But Nyrane's attention was fixed on something else entirely, the encrypted data crystal she'd found hidden in her ceremonial robes. This is why they attacked the diplomatic vessel, she said, holding up the crystal. My father must have slipped it to me during the reception. He knew something was wrong. Rylan finished sealing the room's atmospheric barriers before joining her. Can you access it? It requires a royal genetic key. She pressed her thumb against the crystal's surface. Purple light pulsed beneath her iridescent skin as the crystal authenticated her DNA. A holographic display burst to life, filling the room with streams of data. Nyrane's eyes widened as she read the Centaurian text. This is impossible. The Trade Council would never. Care to share with the primitive human? Rylan asked, though his tone was light. She shot him a look that was more apologetic than annoyed. The Trade Council has been secretly acquiring human medical technology, specifically, your regenerative techniques. But they're not using it for healing. Rylan's expression hardened. They're weaponizing it. Worse. Nyrane's hands trembled as she manipulated the holographic display. They're using it to create biological agents targeted at specific genetic markers. They could wipe out entire bloodlines while leaving others untouched. Including your house? Including any who oppose their vision of genetic purity. Her voice was bitter. They've forgotten the plague that nearly destroyed our species, the one that led to our first contact with humans. Your primitive medical science saved millions of Centaurian lives. Rylan moved closer, studying the data. These formulas, they're perversions of standard regenerative protocols. Someone with intimate knowledge of both human and Centaurian medicine had to be involved. A sudden bang against the sealed door made them both jump. The assassins had found them. We need to get this information to both governments, Nirain said, deactivating the crystal. But first we have to survive the next few minutes. Rylan was already moving, pulling hidden panels from the walls to reveal an impressive arsenal. I modified these weapons using the same principles as medical nanites. They'll bypass standard Centaurian personal shielding. Resourceful indeed, Nirain murmured, accepting a sleek pistol. You continue to surprise me, Rylan. Just wait until you see what I did with the dermal regenerator. He grinned, the expression making him look boyishly handsome despite the danger. It makes an excellent plasma cutter. Another impact rattled the door. The seal wouldn't hold much longer. Nirain, Rylan said suddenly, his voice serious. Whatever happens, I want you to know that working with you has changed everything I thought I knew about your people. She reached out, her iridescent fingers intertwining with his. And you, Rylan Pierce, have taught me that humanity's greatest strength isn't your technology or your adaptability. It's your capacity to care, even for those who initially reject you. The door's seal finally gave way with an explosive burst. As armed figures began pouring through the breach, Nirain and Rylan moved in perfect synchronization, their differences forgotten in the heat of battle. The first attacker fell to Rylan's modified weapon, his shield flickering uselessly. Nirain's royal combat training proved lethal as she dispatched two more with elegant precision. The ventilation shaft. Rylan called out, laying down covering fire. It leads to the station's communication hub. They fought their way across the room, covering each other with an instinctive understanding that transcended their brief time together. Nirain couldn't help but marvel at how naturally they worked together, how their different fighting styles complemented each other perfectly. As Rylan helped her into the shaft, their faces came close. For a moment, the battle seemed to fade away. His eyes held questions, possibilities, things neither of them had dared to acknowledge. We should. She began. Later, he promised, understanding everything she wasn't saying. When we've exposed the truth and stopped a genocide. Then we'll talk about everything. More attackers burst into the room. Rylan sealed the shaft behind them as they crawled through the station's arteries, carrying proof of a conspiracy that threatened both their species. The communication hub is neutral territory, Nirain said as they moved. Protected by multiple treaties. If we can broadcast this evidence to both governments simultaneously. They can't cover it up, Rylan finished. But the Trade Council will have agents there too. Then we'll deal with them together. She paused, looking back at him. Do you trust me, Rylan Pierce? With my life, he replied without hesitation. Though I'm still not sure why. Her smile was radiant even in the dim shaft. Perhaps because we've both learned to see past our preconceptions. To see each other as we truly are. They continued through the darkness, toward what they hoped would be salvation for both their peoples. But even as they focused on their mission, neither could ignore the growing awareness that they had found something extraordinary in each other, a connection that defied generations of prejudice and mistrust. The fate of two species rested in their hands. And perhaps, though neither dared voice it yet, the fate of their own hearts as well. The communication hub of Station Delta glittered like a jewel in space, its transparent dome offering a panoramic view of the stars. Rylan and Nirain emerged from the maintenance shaft into an auxiliary control room, their weapons ready. Too quiet, Rylan muttered, scanning the darkened room. The hub should have been bustling with communication officers from a dozen species. Instead, it was deserted. Nirain moved to a control panel, her fingers dancing across the interface. The entire hub's been locked down. Emergency protocols engaged by order of the Centaurian High Council? It's a trap, Rylan realized. They knew we'd come here. Indeed we did. The lights blazed to life, revealing High Counselor Vex standing at the main entrance, flanked by armed guards. His ceremonial robes couldn't hide his military bearing, and his face bore the same intricate markings as Nirain's, the sign of the first house. "Uncle?" Nirain's voice was barely a whisper. "My dear niece," Vex's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've led us on quite a chase. And with such interesting company." Rylan kept his weapon trained on the guards, noting their positions. "She knows everything, Counselor. About the weapons program, the genetic targeting. It's over." "Over?" Vex laughed. "My naive human friend, it's only beginning. Nirain, surely you understand what we're trying to achieve. Genetic purity, the advancement of our species. Through genocide?" Nirain's voice shook with rage. "By corrupting human medical science into a weapon of mass murder? Sacrifices must be made for progress. Your father was too weak to understand this. Just as your mother was too weak, too fascinated with humanity." Vexa's expression hardened. "Why do you think she died in that unfortunate accident?" Nirain's body went rigid. You killed her? She was going to expose our early experiments. She had to be stopped, just as you must be stopped now." Vex raised his hand, and the guards took aim. "Though I think watching your human pet die first will be a fitting punishment for your betrayal of our species." Time seemed to slow. Rylan saw the guards' fingers tightening on their triggers. He knew they couldn't survive this, not without a miracle. And then he remembered, he had one last card to play. "Nirain," he called out. "Do you trust me?" She met his eyes, and in that moment, everything passed between them, understanding, fear, and something deeper that neither had dared name. "Always." Rylan pulled out what looked like a medical injector and slammed it against his chest. His body began to glow with an otherworldly light. "What is this?" Vex demanded. "A little project I've been working on," Rylan managed through gritted teeth. "Combining human regenerative technology with Centaurian quantum biology. You're not the only one who can adapt medical science." His skin crackled with energy that spread outward in a wave, disrupting the guards' weapons and shields. Nirain didn't hesitate, taking advantage of their confusion to access the hub's main controls. "No!" Vex lunged for her, but Rylan intercepted him, his enhanced strength matching the Centaurian's natural power. "The data crystal!" Rylan shouted, struggling with Vex. "Broadcast it now." Nirain's fingers flew across the console as she uploaded the evidence. But as the files began transmitting, warning lights flashed across the screens. "Encryption virus detected," the computer announced. "Security protocols engaging. Transmission suspended." "Did you really think we wouldn't have safeguards?" Vex laughed, throwing Rylan aside. "Your primitive technology is no match for." His words cut off as Rylan's modified weapon caught him in the chest, disrupting his personal shield. But the effort sent Rylan to his knees, his body shaking from the experimental enhancement. The transmissions blocked on all channels, Nirain called out, desperation in her voice. "I can't," she stopped suddenly, staring at Rylan with widening eyes. "Your enhancement, the quantum signature." Understanding dawned on her face. Without hesitation, she ran to Rylan's side, pressing her hand against his glowing skin. Their quantum signatures merged, creating a feedback loop that amplified the signal beyond anything the virus could contain. The hub's screens blazed to life as the transmission broke through, broadcasting to every ship and station in range. The evidence of the Trade Council's crime spread across space at quantum speeds, impossible to stop or deny. "What have you done?" Vex whispered, watching as his plans crumbled. What my mother would have done, Nyrane replied, still holding on to Rylan. Prove that humans and Centaurians are stronger together than apart. Security forces began pouring into the hub, real ones this time, responding to the broadcast. But Nyrane's attention was on Rylan, who had collapsed in her arms, his body fighting the effects of the enhancement. Stay with me, she pleaded, her medical training telling her his vital signs were dangerously unstable. Don't you dare leave me now, not when we've finally. Not going anywhere, he managed a weak smile. Though I might need a doctor. Lucky for you, I know a pretty good one. She pressed her forehead to his, their quantum energies still intertwined. Even if he is just a primitive human. As station security secured Vex and his conspirators, Nyrane held Rylan close, knowing that everything had changed, not just for their people, but for them. They had uncovered a plot, prevented a genocide, and in the process, discovered that the greatest barriers between their species had never been technological or biological, but the walls they built in their own hearts. 2 weeks after the events at the communication hub, Rylan stood before the combined Human-Centaurian Council, his dress uniform feeling stiff and formal after days in medical scrubs. The enhancement's effects had taken time to stabilize, leaving him with a subtle iridescent sheen to his skin, a permanent reminder of how far he'd gone to protect both their peoples. The council chamber was packed with representatives from both species, all gathered to witness this historic session. At the center of the chamber, evidence of the Trade Council's conspiracy was being presented in devastating detail. But Rylan's attention kept drifting to where Nyrane sat with her father, the first speaker of the Centaurian High Council. She caught his eye and smiled, her quantum signature pulsing slightly, another side effect of their merged energies during the crisis. They could sense each other now, a constant awareness that should have been impossible between their species. Dr. Pierce, the human chairwoman, addressed him. Your actions, while heroic, involve the use of unauthorized medical technologies. Some would say dangerous technologies. With respect, Madam Chairwoman, Rylan responded, those dangerous technologies prevented a genocide and exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed the peace between our peoples. A peace that some would argue was fragile to begin with, a Centaurian Council member interjected. Our species have maintained diplomatic relations, but true understanding? True cooperation? These have eluded us. Perhaps because we never had the right catalyst, Nyrane's voice rang out as she stood, ignoring protocol. We've spent generations focusing on our differences, letting prejudice blind us to our potential together. She moved to stand beside Rylan, her presence steady and sure. The council chamber buzzed with murmurs as everyone noticed how their quantum signatures harmonized, creating patterns of light that danced between them. My daughter speaks wisdom, first speaker Tharn said, rising from his seat. We have long claimed that humans were too primitive to be true partners in the galaxy's future. Yet when faced with our darkest conspiracy, it was human ingenuity combined with Centaurian knowledge that saved us from ourselves. Rylan felt Nyrane's hand slip into his, their fingers intertwining naturally. The enhancement I developed wasn't just about combining our medical technologies, he explained to the council. It was about proving that our species can be more than the sum of our parts. And what of the side effects? The human chairwoman pressed. The permanent changes to your biology? They are not side effects, Nyrane declared. They are proof of what we can become together. My mother believed this before she was silenced. She saw humanity's potential, just as I have learned to see it through Rylan's actions, his courage, and his heart. The chamber fell silent as first speaker Tharn descended from the council platform to stand before them. His ceremonial robes shimmered as he studied the unlikely pair, his royal daughter and the human doctor who had changed everything. My wife, he said softly, your mother, would be proud of what you have accomplished. Both of you. He turned to address the council. We stand at a crossroads. We can retreat back into our comfortable prejudices, or we can embrace the example these two have set. What are you proposing, first speaker? The human chairwoman asked. A new era of cooperation. True cooperation. He gestured to Rylan and Nyrane. Let them lead a joint medical research initiative, combining the best of both our sciences. Not for weapons or power, but for healing. For progress. There will be resistance, a council member warned. Generations of mistrust cannot be erased overnight. No, Rylan agreed, but they can be overcome one step at a time. He squeezed Nyrane's hand. We're living proof of that. The debate continued for hours, but in the end, the council voted to approve the initiative. As the chamber began to clear, Rylan and Nyrane slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the station's garden dome. Well, Doctor, Nyrane teased, it seems you'll be stuck with this primitive princess for the foreseeable future. Funny, he pulled her close, their quantum signatures creating a soft aurora around them. I was just thinking how fortunate I am that you got shot that day. She laughed, the sound like music. Fortunate that I was injured? Fortunate that I was stubborn enough to treat you anyway. His expression grew serious. Your uncle's trial begins next week. Are you ready? With you beside me? She touched his cheek, marveling at how their energies intertwined. I'm ready for anything. As they stood together, watching the stars through the garden dome, both reflected on how far they'd come. From prejudice to partnership, from distrust to something deeper than either had imagined possible. They had not only changed themselves but had opened the door for their peoples to follow. You know, Rylan mused, when I was modifying that enhancement, I never imagined it would lead to this, to us. The best discoveries are often unexpected, Nyrane replied. Like finding out that the most advanced thing about humans isn't their medical science or their adaptability. Oh. And what is it then? She kissed him softly, their quantum energies creating patterns of light that reflected off the dome's surface. Your capacity to love, even across the stars themselves. Their story would become legend in the years that followed, the princess who learned to see beyond her prejudices and the doctor who dared to break down the barriers between their species. But for Rylan and Nyrane, standing together under the stars, it was simply the beginning of their greatest adventure, proving that understanding, trust, and love could bridge any distance, even the vast expanses between their worlds.